Hi, everyone. Want to welcome everyone to this 1031 exchange class. I'm really excited to have Luann Blau with us and to go over these 1031 exchanges. And I personally think this is, if you're a realtor in investments, this is going to be vital for us as realtors and real estate investors to understand and to know, because we have so much money coming from these outside states coming into Texas, and many people want to do these 1031 exchanges. So I'm really excited to hear from Luann and have her educate us and teach us on what a great opportunity this will be for all of us. And a couple little announcements. This is going to be offered for CE credit. I am going to put Luann's email, and if you can just, I'll put this in the chat. If you can just email Luann your, if you're a realtor, your license number. So I think that's it for announcements. And Luann, do you want to take it? And by the way, I'm Ryan Shea. I think it has, I logged in as Dr. Hank. I changed my name, but I'm a realtor here in Dallas, been in real estate for over 11 years now. So, and I'll be in the background here, but Luann, do you want to take it away here? Anything else?
No, I was just going to put, if you want to put in the chat, my Facebook page.
Okay.
I have a Facebook page I started about 1.5 years ago, and we've got close to 1,000 members. And it's called 1031 Exchange Assistance. So if anybody wants to join that, I don't let people buy or sell and advertise properties. It's purely for education and questions, but we've had a lot of fun. Okay. Dialoguing, because you're going to get a lot of information today and you're probably going to forget most of it. So that would be the only one. So yeah, so I'm Luann Blau and I work for Exchange Resource Group. We are a nationwide qualified intermediary. They've been in business as this company for about 20 years. I have been working with them for 8 years. Previously, and still to a certain extent, I have my own mobile notary business, and that's actually how I connected with Ryan through Gail Clavness at Capital Title, who's a great closer. I've closed some of Ryan's deals, we figured out, but so the 1031 exchange, it has been my main focus really for the last 8 years. So 1031 exchange, just to give you a brief history. Well, okay, so he put the wrong phone number on there. We updated this just for you. Phone number is not 214-863-1031. It's 972-863-1031. I should have proved it, Ken. That's okay. So 972-863-1031. And then my email's up there again. Okay. So for realtors, this is going to be the kind of outline of our class. First, I'm going to give you some history of the 1031 exchange. And then I'm going to help you as realtors learn enough to put this in your toolbox. Depends on how deep you want to go. You're going to get all the information today, but I want you to know enough to be able to know whether or not a 1031 exchange will help your client. Because if it fits, you can be their hero. The one thing I'd like you to take away from this, if you don't remember anything else, is that a 1031 exchange must be set up before the close on the sale. It absolutely breaks my heart when people call me and say, yeah, my CPA told me I had 45 days to decide whether or not I wanted to do a 1031 exchange. Once the money hits the seller's account and doesn't go to its exchange account, there is nothing we can do to help. I even had a CPA call me yesterday he called, he said, yeah, we didn't get it set up on the sale and now the deadline's hitting. Will you go ahead and send us a form so we can submit our list? And I said, no. I said, that would be fraud and put me out of business. You need to remember to set it up before the sale. So we're going to go through a couple questions to help you. We're going to go through the 6 rules. We're going to identify what to be looking for when you're choosing a qualified intermediary. That's what we are. So hopefully after today, you won't have to figure out who you want to use. We're going to go over some exchange problems, challenges, whatever you want to call them, how to avoid them, how to figure them out. And then at the end, I've got 2 really cool examples of how people have used 1031 exchange for their tax planning strategies all the way to retirement and beyond. My boss says you defer, and then you die. So 1031 exchange was set up to defer long-term capital gains tax on investment properties. And it was set up 100 years ago. And it started with ranchers and farmers just sitting around swapping properties. And then over the years, of course, the IRS had to get involved and put some rules in there. And since 1984, it's been in the structure that it's been in, except Trump tax reform 2 years ago. We used to be able to do exchanges on personal property as well as real estate. So it used to be if you were a rancher and you had cows and your cows had gone up in value and you wanted to defer your tax, you could sell your cows and buy other cows. Couldn't buy bulls, but you could buy cows. If you had a Learjet, you could sell that Learjet and upgrade to a higher Learjet. But all that, I think that was a compromise that Trump made in 2018. And just the FYI, we are keeping a very close eye on this new administration. Every 4 years, it comes up. 1031 exchange is on the chopping block. The fact of the matter is there are so many people in Washington that have made their money doing 1031 exchanges that if it comes up, we're not overly concerned about it, but there's a lot of things that have happened in the last month and a half that have been a little bit off the grid. So we are keeping an eye on it, and we will keep people posted. All right. So true or false quiz. You woke up this morning hoping and praying for an exchange to do. Probably not. But 1031 exchanges are boring. True. But think about it. If you tell a seller about a 1031 exchange and they realize how much money they're going to save, you're going to be their hero. You're going to do that listing on the sale. They have to buy something else. A 1031 exchange starts with a sale and ends with a buy. They have to buy something else or more than one something else's. You're going to get that listing. So it is a great way for you as realtors to not only show goodwill to your clients, but also multiply your commission. I don't know if you steal business from your competitors at the closing table, but I will tell you, if you ever get to the closing table with a seller and they decide they want to do a 1031 exchange, we will get it done from the closing table. We've done it many, many times before. Okay. You have more deals and grateful, wealthier clients. What can be wrong with that? All right, so a 1031 exchange starts with a sale, ends with a buy. So why would an investor want to use a 1031 exchange? We're going to go over an example. So if you have a client or if you're an investor yourself and you've owned your property for longer than a year and a day, you qualify for long-term capital gains tax as opposed to short-term capital gains tax. People who flip properties fall under the short-term capital gains tax code. and they do not qualify for 1031 exchange. The IRS differentiates between someone who buys a property purely for the purpose of rehabbing it and selling it to somebody who buys a property to hold it for investment purposes, try to lease it out. Anyway, flippers should not do 1031 exchanges. Some of them do anyway, but we always send them back to their CPA. So in Texas, the long-term capital gains rate is about 20% of the gain. And just real quick, how you figure out what that gain is, you look at the original purchase price of what they bought, and then you add in capital improvements and you subtract depreciation. We don't have a state tax, so the federal rate's going to be 15%, but most people in real estate are going to have enough income that they're going to qualify to get the Medicare surcharge. So that's why we say 20% of your gain if you don't do an exchange. Also, if they've owned the property for a while and they've depreciated it over several years, then you have what's called depreciation recapture. And if you don't do a 1031 exchange, you're going to be hit 25% of your depreciation recapture. So I have several clients that have done exchanges where their properties have not appreciated that much, but they've held it for so long that the depreciation capture has made it worthwhile to do it. Our friends coming in from California, and I'll use California as an example because they have the highest capital gains rate in the country. They have the 20% federal. They also have 13.3% state tax on top of that. So if they're selling a property in California that qualifies, they're going to pay 33% of that gain in tax if they don't do a 1031 exchange. So if you guys are working with people that are coming in from out of state, they're investors, just pose the question, have you thought about doing a 1031 exchange? So I'm going to show you an example of just what the 1031 exchange can do for your clients. And how do I move this, all these people over here, because it's in my way. Oh well, all right. So we have two properties. We're going to say their gain and their basis, it's going to be 100,000. Investor A is going to do an exchange. They're not going to pay any tax. They've got $100,000 left after tax to invest. We're going to assume that the lender, and again, this PowerPoint's a few years old. I don't know what lenders are requiring for down payment now, but we're going to assume 20%. So A is going to be able, if they want to spend that all, to purchase property worth $500,000. B, on the other hand, is going to go ahead and pay the tax, $20,000. They're going to have $80,000 to reinvest, so they're going to be able to qualify for $400,000 worth of property. All right, so let's go 5 years down the road. They decide to sell again, and we're assuming that property value is going up 5% annually, just for purposes of this. So A's property is worth $638, B's at $510. They sell again. A defers the tax, has $138,000. So new property 20% down, $690,000 worth of property, still hasn't paid any tax. B, on the other hand, decides to not 1031 exchange. At the end of the day, can buy property worth $442,000 and has paid significant amount of tax. So say you started 10 years ago. See, look how much property A is buying compared to B. So say you started 10 years ago and all things remaining equal. We're also not factoring in depreciation recapture here. A's at 881, B's at 564. They sell, A defers, B does not. At the end of the day, A still hasn't paid any tax. Close to $1 million worth of property. B's under 500,000 still and has paid tax. And then if you really started a long time ago, look at that. 20 years ago, this is how people build their wealth and their portfolio using the 1031 exchange. At the end of the day, it is possible that A could have $3.640 million worth of property and not paid any tax, and B hasn't even reached $1 million. So the trick with this too is if you do this as a lifetime strategy and then you die, which we all will die, your heirs are going to inherit the property that you have, that you own, not at the value that it was umpteen years ago when they started, but it would be at the value. So say A passes away, his kids inherit $3.6 million worth of property. They're never going to have to pay that long-term capital gains tax or that depreciation recapture. Their new basis, meaning the amount where they start appreciating, is going to be that 3.6 million. So a lot of people use it for a lifetime strategy. It's a great way to enjoy the income during your years here, and then to leave a legacy for your kids. So if they sold it right when you died at that 3.6, they wouldn't pay any tax. So that's just an example of what you can do with the exchange. Yeah. Which of these investors would you prefer to have a long-term relationship with? I'm thinking maybe A. All right, so your question as a realtor, when you meet an investor, what was the property used for? Did they use it for business, trade, or investment? Ding, 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 ding. Have you thought, how long have you owned it? Oh, I've owned it 5 years. Have you thought about doing a 1031 exchange? They say, what is that? You don't have to go any further than that. You can just give them my number and I'll take them from there if you want to do that. But you've at least triggered the thought. And then, yeah. And then the second question is, what do you want to do with the money? You'll see oil rigs here. So a 1031 exchange, there's a kind of a funny misunderstanding out there that that like kind, which is another name you will hear for exchange, means if you're selling a single family house, you have to buy another single family house. And that is false. A 1031 exchange is anything defined as real estate can be sold for, and anything defined as real estate can be bought. So in Texas, for example, oil and gas mineral rights are defined as real estate. I have an attorney friend from college in San Antonio, and he sends me people a lot where they're wanting to sell their oil and gas mineral rights and reinvest in real estate, and they can. In Colorado, where we're based, I'm in Dallas, the company's in Denver. Water rights are defined as real estate. And I had a guy call me from Utah once, and in Utah, gold mineral rights are defined as real estate. So it really depends state by state, and you can sell something in one state and you can purchase something in another state, any state in the Union, plus Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And the reason the U.S. Virgin Islands are there is a senator from New York named Charlie Rangel. Back in the 70s, he owned a bunch of property in the U.S. Virgin Island. So he decided he wanted to be able to 1031 exchange. So somehow he got that rule changed. But you can't own a property in Texas and buy in Cabo, because that's Mexico. If you sell a property in Cabo, you could buy in Canada, but you can't buy back in Texas. So it's domestic for domestic and foreign for foreign. Okay, so we have 6 rules. Well, we have 7 rules actually, but I already told you one. The 7th rule is that you have to set it up before you close. Okay, I'm going to list these and then I'm going to go through them one by one. So the properties had to be held for investment. Then we have the rule that all realtors hate, the 45-day rule. And then we have the 180-day rule. And then we have requirements for us as your QI. Then we have title requirements. And then we have the rule, how much do I need to spend to totally defer the taxes? Okay, and if you have questions during these rules, just put them in the chat or just unmute and ask. All right, so property held for investment, any property held for income or used to produce income can be exchanged for investment or any income producing property. That's kind of what I went over a few minutes ago, real estate for real estate. So rental property is always an investment. Bare land is always an investment, even though you may not lease it out or farm on it. Why else would you buy bare land if it wasn't for investment? Here's an example. So Mike and Mary, they own a duplex that they bought in, Ryan, can you see what that says? I'm hiding is it 2001? For the year that they bought it?
In 2010.
2010, okay, so he
Hey,
updated
Luann,
it.
if you go up to your view in the right corner,
Okay.
seeing your video, your photos and stuff, your gallery, I guess you call it.
Record meeting info. Okay, hold on. Need my glasses.
It's in the right
If
hand
I
corner.
Yeah, it says chat, record meeting info.
Up in the right corner, it says view. Click on that.
Okay, mine does not say that.
Okay, I don't know.
Okay, I'll work it out. I'll work it out. Mike and Mary own a duplex they bought in 2010. They've rented it out to various tenants ever since. And now they want to sell it and buy a place at the beach. So VRBO, Airbnb, and use a little bit themselves. Does this qualify for a 1031 exchange? And the answer is yes, it does. The rules with Airbnb and VRBO is you can use it yourself for 10% of the number of days that you rent it, or 14 calendar days out of the year, whichever is greater. So say you rented it out 240 days a year, you could use it personal use for 24. What other people do to kind of spread that around a little bit is they'll decide they need to make a trip to go and fix something. So that is a way that you can do vacation properties. We're seeing a lot of people calling with the VRBO. So, I mean, VRBO, but also in Broken Bow, Oklahoma is a big hot area right now where I'm seeing people buying vacation properties. I think it's a little bit overpriced, but yes, you definitely can. Okay.
So did you say that you can stay in there for 24 days?
If you rent it 240 days, then technically you're qualified to stay in it for 24 days. If you rent it for 200 days and you want to use it 20 days, and then you have to make a trip because you have to go see that everything is working right, then you just document that you've gone up to do a repair trip. Yeah, it's a great way to do it. Okay, now your 45-day rule. Okay, so when you close on the sale, as soon as you close on the sale, that triggers your 45 calendar day timeline. And within 45 calendar days from the date of the sale, you have to submit a list of potential replacement properties. So the way we do it, as soon as you close on the sale and the bank sends you an email that funds have been received, then that triggers our system and we'll send you a 45-day deadline and a form that needs to be filled out. Once day 45 hits, you have to pick something from that list. Now, I will qualify that by saying that we did get an extension because of the ice storm, because we were named national disaster and FEMA got involved. So I do have people that if they had a deadline falling between February 12th and I think it was February 22nd, that they don't have to identify anything until June 15th. We did have a extension last year for COVID, same thing. And then there was an extension when that hurricane hit Houston a couple years ago. So we used to have said no extensions, but there have been with national disasters. But normally by day 45, you can look at 200 properties in between day 1 and day 45. But by day 45, you have to nail down what you're going to buy. And as hot of a market as it is, what some people are doing, especially if they're selling single family to their tenants, they're making an arrangement saying, look, I know you want to buy this property, but I want to nail down my replacement properties first because it's just so hard to find properties. So you can buy before that 45 days is up if you're able to do that. You just have to time it so that the sale happens first. We get the money in the 1031 exchange count, and then 5, 6, 7 days later, we can turn around and send it right back out. The other thing that I tell people is make sure you give enough time in between because we're seeing so many lender delays on sales. I had a lady, she lives in Oregon. She identified 5 new builds in Texas, getting ready to close. Her sale, the lender kept delaying on her sale, and she was very close to her 180-day deadline when they finally got it done. But yeah, I hope there aren't too many lenders on here. Lenders are not my favorite people right now for getting things done. All right, so how many properties can you identify on that list? So the IRS isn't going to let us put money down and tie up 20 different properties. What the rule says, and again, after this, stop me if you have questions on this, you can identify up to 3 properties with no cap on the value. But once you put more than 3 properties, the 200% rule kicks in. So say, Ryan, you sold a property for $300,000 and you wanted to put 5 properties on your list. So more than 3. So we have to take your sales price of 300,000 times 2, which equals 600,000, right? So the total purchase price of those 5 properties that you identify and put on your list cannot be greater than $600,000. I'm going to show you a couple examples because this is pretty confusing. Well, no extensions, but we've had a presidentially declared disaster area. Okay, so Jack and Jill sell their rental for $800,000 and they want to identify 2 or 3 replacement properties for $2 million each. Can they do this? And the answer is yes, because the 200% rule doesn't kick in because they're identifying 2 or 3. Okay, is that clear? So if they've got the cash and they want to buy $2 million properties, they can absolutely take that $800,000 in exchange and use it for down payments. Okay, now they sell a property on January 1st for $100,000. And Brad, not Jennifer, just Brad, finds 4 little condominiums that are selling for $75,000 each. Is this okay? The answer is no, because it's 4 little condos. So the 200% rule kicks in. So you times 4 times 75, and that is $300,000, right? But because we have to apply the 200% rule, their maximum purchase price for those 4 condos could only be $200,000. 2 times the 100,000. So they could buy 3 of them. The other caveat with this, there's always a trick. If these 4 little condos were congruent, meaning next to each other, from the same seller in one closing, then we could count it as one identification. Okay. Questions, concerns, don't like it, anything? Okay, so you're either not listening or I'm being very clear. It's hard. That's my only thing I don't like about Zoom. I can't really get a feel for if people are getting it. All right, so 3 or less properties, the value doesn't matter. Over 3, then the 200% rule kicks in. Most of the time, if you're selling a single residential property, you want to just kind of keep in your mind that you want to stick to 1 or 2 or 3 identifications. Okay. So now we're to the 180-day rule. So from the date of closing on the sale, the 45 and the 180 run next to each other at the same time. You have 180 calendar days to complete the exchange. And it has to be 1 or more of the properties on the ID list. And I said a little bit earlier, the only time we're seeing people get into trouble with this is if they're trying to do new construction. There's been so many delays. Because if day 180 hits and you haven't closed, then the money is going to have to go back and they're going to have to pay the tax. Okay.
That 180 days starts on the day that they closed on the previous property, correct? So it's,
yeah, the 45 and the 180 start on the same day. Okay. So it's really 45 plus 135.
Gotcha.
Okay. So who are we? We are a qualified intermediary. I'm gonna hit just the basic requirements of it, and then I'm gonna come back and tell you in a little bit how we do things. So the IRS requires that you have an independent third party to facilitate the exchange. There is no licensing for qualified intermediaries. There has been fraud with qualified intermediaries. The only requirement is that they must provide a qualified escrow account, meaning an independent third-party account for the proceeds to be held during the period of the exchange. Back in 2017, I don't know if you were realtors, were in Land America Commonwealth title, got in a lot of trouble for fraud with 1031 exchange. They had an in-house exchange company, and we set up a segregated account for each exchange. So everybody that does an exchange on each property has their own account. They commingled funds and they reinvested them in the stock market, buying options. And then the stock market crashed. There was about $200 million tied up with banks, with 1031 exchanges. And the president of Land America Title went to jail. He went to bed in jail. So you have to be very careful. I'm going to come back. I'm going to stop here on this, and I'll come back in a couple slides and tell you exactly how this works. Okay, so requirements for title. This is fancy legalese with the exchange, which basically says, however the taxpayer holds title to the old property is how the taxpayer has to take title to the new property. So if you own your property individually, odds are that your social security number is your taxpayer ID. When you go to buy your replacement property, that social security number still has to be the taxpayer ID. So a question will come up. I was single when I bought this property and now I'm married. We want to go forward. We want to sell his property or her property, and we want to go forward and purchase a property together. Can we do that? Our answer is yes, as long as you file a joint tax return. Because if you file a joint tax return and you show that property on that joint tax return, you are in essence one and the same. The other question I will get is, I'm selling a single family. I want to buy an apartment. I need to set up an LLC for the apartment. How do I do that? And the answer is you can set up an LLC as long as you set it up as what's called a disregarded entity, meaning that the tax is ultimately going to flow back to your own personal taxpayer ID. So it would be called, write down single member disregarded entity. That is a way to form an LLC that will work with the exchange if someone is selling using their own taxpayer ID.
What was that again? Single member what?
Single member disregarded entity. So the LLC itself doesn't file its own tax return and have its own EIN number, because the onus, if you're ever audited and the IRS takes a look at your exchange, which doesn't happen very often, but if it did, then you'd have to be able to prove that the same taxpayer ID was on the sale and the buy. Okay, is that clear? Okay. I have my boss's voice in my head on this. So Bev and Ben are dating. Okay. In this scenario, Ben's feeling a little bit secure about the relationship. So Bev is the owner of the rental house. Ben convinces her that she wants to add him to the title before the sale and the beginning of the exchange. Is this a good idea? The answer is no, because Bev would still end up paying the capital gains tax for the period that she owned it as a single person. She changed title right before an exchange starts, which you never want to do. Going forward, she's going to give Ben half ownership, and she will have paid all the tax. So Dan would say she needs to find a new boyfriend. A way they could do it is Bev could buy the new property as a single person, and then she could add Ben to the title, give him 50% ownership or whatever afterwards, and then they could go forward as co-owners, and that would work fine as long as when they sold on the other side, they both went forward together. But you don't ever, rule of thumb, you don't ever want to change title, and you don't want to refi an investment property any closer than 6 months to when you're going to sell it. The IRS, that's kind of a red flag to the IRS. If you pull all the equity out of a property and then you sell it right away, that could be a little audit trigger. Okay. So how much do I need to buy to totally defer my tax? There's a lot of questions on this too, because people think they only have to reinvest their profit, and they would not make it that easy for us. So the equal or up rule means for a completely non-taxable event. So we'll go back to Ryan's $300,000 property. Say Ryan had $50,000 note on it. And then after closing costs that are taken out at closing, there's $130,000 worth of cash left. So the reinvestment goal to totally defer that tax is going to be $280,000. It's going to be the amount of the debt payoff or note payoff and the amount of cash that transfers to the exchange. A lot of people think they only have to reinvest the cash. They do have to use all the cash, but they have to buy property worth, in this example, $280,000 or greater. It doesn't have to be one property. It could be 2 or 3 properties that add up to that amount or greater, but it's not that just the cash. Any questions on that? Okay. Yeah. All right, so here's your quiz, and then I'm going to tell you how we do things. A property that qualifies for the exchange is a property that's been held for investment. Like kind does not mean single family is single family. It means real estate to real estate. So how many days to identify? 45. How many days to complete the exchange? 180. They both start on the date of sale. We are what's called a qualified intermediary, so we're the go-between for you. Title requirements have to be the same. Taxpayer. And then to totally defer the tax, you've got to purchase property equal or up, greater. Okay. So anybody can serve as a QI, except your CPA and your attorney, because of potential conflict of interest. Probably don't want to use your brother-in-law. You don't want your brother-in-law messing in your business. And if something happened and his assets got frozen, you'd be in trouble. So you want to use a totally independent company. And what you want to look for is the security of funds. That's the most important thing. Documentation of the exchange and consulting. So we use a bank in Denver called Fortis, Fortis, private bank. And each account is FDIC insured. Before any money is moved on the purchase, it requires the client signature, our signature, and the bank signature. We do all the documentation on the sale and then on the purchase with the other title company, getting all the wording right. At the end of every calendar year, we send out a summary of account for your tax preparation. We're not allowed to do any tax forms, heaven forbid. I had to do tax forms, that'd be scary. But we will send you a flow of the account. And then most important part too is that they're easily accessible to answer questions at no charge. That's where I excel. I will call everybody back. I will spend as much time as needed with clients to kind of walk you through it. Anyway, we do a good job. So a lot of experience. We have 4 attorneys in Denver. I'm here in Dallas. We have a guy in Florida. And I cover, well, I'll cover anywhere. David played at Purdue. So when I was traveling to Indiana for football games, I'd be picking up exchange clients on airplanes when I was going. All right, so exchange challenges, if you will. Corporations, partnerships, and LLCs can do 1031 exchanges. It's just a taxpayer ID on that building in that partnership is the one that has to go forward. So if you have a guy like Fred, who is the F and G partnership, and he owns 25% and he wants out, the partnership is selling its building, he cannot go out on his own, pull his money out and go do his own 1031 exchange, because the taxpayer ID has to be the same on the sale and the buy. So the taxpayer ID for the partnership is the taxpayer ID on the sale. Fred's taxpayer ID would be the one on the buy. Now, if there are some LLCs, there's something called drop and swap, which we have done before, where the LLC dissolves and drops out the members. I won't go into that too much right now, but there is kind of a way to dissolve LLCs and still do exchanges. All right, trusts can do 1031 exchanges. Again, the same thing applies for the taxpayer ID. Tenancies, there's something called tenant in common that the 1031 exchange loves. So if David, you and Ryan were going to go buy a property, you'd have a couple different options on how to do it. You could form a partnership that had its own taxpayer ID and you could go purchase that property. 5 years down the road, if you went to sell it, you would probably both have to go in the same direction because you're governed by that taxpayer ID. But if you bought it tenant in common, where each of you bought a 50% or whatever percent undivided percentage interest in the property, you would both show on the settlement statement, both show on the note, both show on the deed of trust as undivided percentage owners. Then you form a little shell company to manage the business. 5 years down the road, you decide to sell and you decide you want to go different directions. You don't have to do what the other person wants because your taxpayer ID owns that percentage ownership interest in that property. It's a little bit more work going in because you have to put the tenant in common agreement together. Most lenders are on board with it, but it's a great way to buy property with someone else and keep your own goals in mind. Divorce issues. Divorces are tricky. If there's real estate involved, there is a way that we can help them with the 1031 exchange. So say you have a couple that's divorcing and they own 4 rental properties. Sorry, can't turn off the work phone, forgive me. Say they owned 4 rental properties and they had a lot of capital gains. They have a couple different options. They could just go ahead and sell them and pay the capital gains and go on. Or if they're amicable, they could sell the properties as a married couple, go through the divorce, allocate a different property. Well, let's see, sell it, buy it together, but then make it part of the divorce decree that each spouse is going to get 2 of the properties as single people. So then they would deed out as single people. So they've done the exchange together because that's how the taxpayer ID was held. They've deferred the capital gains tax, but after the fact, they each become owners of some of the property as single people, and then they can go forward like that. So it doesn't always work, but it is a way if you have people that are amicable. Okay, foreign owners. Does anybody on here deal any people without U.S. taxpayer IDs? Okay. FIRPTA, you do. So have you gotten involved in FIRPTA, Ryan?
No, I've just represented people that are don't have tax IDs.
Okay. Well, FIRPTA, I think FIRPTA is a great cuss word. If I get mad, I could say FIRPTA, but it's an extra withholding tax that is involved when you have a client who does not have a U.S. taxpayer ID. It's kind of a hot mess depending on what state you're in. Some title companies will handle them, some title companies won't. It is possible to do a 1031 exchange. It's just a little bit tricky and there's some extra rules and we charge more. So just so you know, our base price right now is a flat fee of $850. And that includes the work on the sale and 1 purchase. And then if there are additional purchases, it'll be another $250 per purchase after the first. Okay, so that's FIRPTA. Owner carry notes. Anybody deal with clients with owner carry notes? You do? Okay, so it is possible to do exchanges with an owner carry note. Your seller just has to be able to replace the amount of the debt, that they haven't been paid when they go to buy their replacement property. And we, as the intermediary, has to set up that first note, that first owner carry note, and any payments that are made during the period of the exchange before they buy have to be made to us. And we put it in the exchange account. And then once the note's paid off and your client goes forward, then the note flips back to you as the seller. It's a very simplified explanation of something that's a little bit complicated. But they are doable. Owner carry installment notes, kind of the same thing. All right, so what if you don't want to put all your cash into the exchange? You don't have to. You can pull it out. It's called boot. It will be taxable. Whatever you pull out will be taxable. and you have to do it on the closing of the sale. So you can't put all the money in the exchange and then call me 10 days later and say, oops, I forgot it. I forgot I wanted to take 20,000 out. We can't do that. But on the settlement statement, you can show 20,000 to seller and 150,000 to the exchange. We just set it up at closing. It will also reduce your reinvestment goal by however much you pull out. The other time we have boot is, say you go through your exchange and you leave cash in the account. That is called boot. That will be returned to you from the exchange, and that will be taxable. So 3 scenarios for getting money back. If you go through an exchange and you go your full 45 days and you don't find any properties and you don't submit a list, at the end of that 45 days, we'll get your bank information and we'll wire you money back to you. If you submit a 45-day list of 2 properties or however many, you buy both of those properties at day 100, you've completed your exchange. Any excess cash we can return to you at day 100. The only time we have to wait till day 180 is if you identified 3 properties, but say one of them fell through. In the IRS's mind, you still have a possible buy out there. So if that's the case, that's the time we have to hold on the money till day 180. Okay. All right, so back to your questions. What was the property used for? What will the money from the sale be used for? All right, if you want to consolidate, so I have a client right now. She's trying to sell 5 properties, 5 single families, and she's already identified her apartment that she's buying. So she's got her apartment under contract first part of April. She's got 3 of her rentals under contract. She's going to get the other 2 under contract, we hope. So she's going to consolidate the money from all 5 exchanges to purchase that apartment complex. And that's absolutely doable. The only tricky thing with that is the timing. The 45 days and the 180 is going to start on the sale of the first property. So we have to keep an eye on that. Diversification would be the same thing on the other end. You sell an apartment building, you want to go into single family. You can absolutely take the proceeds and divide it up. Keep an eye on the 200% rule. Have everything done in 180 days from the date of the sale of the apartment. And then we're going to go to retirement needs. I'm going to show you my 2 fun examples now. And we all agree that real estate is still the best way to maximize our investment, or why would we be doing this 24/7, right? Uh-oh, why is that not going? Okay, here we go. So here's an estate planning example. This is actually a true story. This is my boss's friends in Nebraska, and they had a farm for many, many years, and the farmland was very valuable, and they have 3 kids, and their neighbors came to them and made them an offer on their farmland that was very, very attractive to them, but they didn't want to pay the capital gains tax. So they're also thinking about their estate planning. So they went to their 3 kids and said, pick out a property that you're going to want to possibly own and run after we're gone. So this top example, one of them picked out a bakery. Another one picked out a rental property. I think it was in a college town. And then these are 3 townhomes. But remember earlier we said 3 townhomes could be counted as one identification if they were next to each other, contiguous, and if they were done in one sale. So that's what happened here. So this is their primary residence. Primary residences fall under a different part of the code. So they carved out a value for that. They did not put that money in exchange, but they sold their farmland, bought these 3 properties. They, while they're alive, are getting the passive income from the 3 properties. So from the bakery, the house, and the townhomes. And then when they both pass, the kids will inherit these properties at a stepped up basis, like we talked about before. So whatever value the property is on the date they inherit it, that will become their new basis. And they'll have an option of either selling it or continuing to run it, hoping that it appreciates it, and then selling someday and maybe starting another 1031 exchange. Isn't that cool? I love that example. And then there is also a way to combine the 1031 exchange with the primary residence. So anybody that owns their own home as your homestead, you're subject to section 121 of the tax code, which means if you're a single person in your homestead, you can exclude the first 250,000 of gain. You don't have to pay tax. And if you're married, you can exclude the first 500,000 worth of gain with no tax. So this example, and this is kind of an extreme example because not all of us are going to have this much gain in our property. But this is actually my boss, Dan. It's his sister and brother-in-law. They bought a house in Boulder, Colorado 40 years ago for 100 grand. They probably couldn't even buy a parking place in Boulder for 100 grand now. But it got appraised at 1.1 million when they went to sell it. So this is wrong. It should say $1 million gain because they paid 100,000 for it. So how do they exit this property without paying any tax? Okay, so they moved out of their property. They actually moved to Spain. You don't have to move to Spain to do this, but he took a teaching job. They moved out of their primary residence and they rented it. So to qualify for 1031 exchange, a house has to be rented for a year and a day. So they did. They rented it, I think longer than that, but in this example. Because they had lived in it as their primary residence for 2 of the previous 5 years, it also qualified for the section 121 exclusion. That's how you qualify for that homestead exclusion. 2 of the previous 5 years. So in this case, because they rented it out for a year and a day, and because they lived in it for 2 of the past 5, they qualified for both. So they have a sales price of 1.1 million. They put 600,000 in exchange. They took 500,000 out as boots, but because they had the homestead exclusion and they're married, they didn't have to pay tax on that. So they took the 600,000 and they bought a new rental property and they're renting that out for at least a year and a day. And then they're going to move back and move into their property and make it their homestead. And so they will have exited that property without paying any capital gains. Probably some depreciation recapture, but no capital gains tax. So what normal people do who don't have $1 million worth of gain, I'll give you an example. I had a lady in Austin actually call me and say she wanted to sell her rental property and she wanted to retire in North Carolina. So she sold her rental property. We put that money in exchange. She sold her primary residence in Austin. She combined the funds for both. She bought the property in North Carolina and she rented it out. And now she's moved into it and she's retiring. So she too, she didn't have enough gain to pay the 121 in her homestead, but she was able to do a 1031 exchange and she didn't pay any tax. And now she's happily living in her home in North Carolina. Some people do this as a lifestyle. They'll buy a house, live in it for 2 years, rent it out for a year and a day, do a 1031 exchange, and just keep on rolling. So it's all very interesting. I hope you're finding it interesting. Okay, so real quick, we're almost done. So reverse exchange. Say you want to buy something and you have to buy it before you sell. Or say you want to buy something and you've got several properties that you want to sell, that you want to combine to purchase something larger. So we'll do an apartment building. There is a way that we, as your qualified intermediary, can help you do that. Because in a straight exchange, which is what we've been talking about, you can't take title to a buy before you sell. Well, reverse exchange, you still can't do that, but we can do it for you. So we will form what's called an EAT. It's an LLC in whatever state you want to buy. We will take title to that property you want to buy, either by borrowing the money from you or your lender, collateralizing it, however all that works. We will take title to that property and we will park it for you. And that will give you 180 days to sell the properties that you want to fund that apartment building. I'm working on a construction exchange right now. She wants to buy bare land and she wants to build 6 little units with the money from a sale. She's got a fairly high dollar sale. So we are forming the entity. We're going to take title to that land. The trick for her is she's only going to have 180 days to get all that money spent in that construction exchange. And she thinks she can do it. So that is a form of a reverse. The other time we see reverse exchanges is when there's a lot of rehab that needs to be done. Because again, once you take title to a property as a replacement property, we can't send any more money to do improvements on that. There's some other ways that we can work with that, but one way would do an improvement exchange. They're way more pricey than straight exchanges, but they make sense in the right situation. Shifting the date of gain recognition. Sometimes people do 1031 exchanges at the end of the year. They'll sell something and they don't want to recognize their gain until the following year. So they'll have no intention of following through with the exchange, but they'll go through the process so they can recognize the gain in their property in the following tax year. We went over integrating with estate planning. We went over combining it with tax-free income. So I am done. And that number is not 214. I'm going to have to get Ken. It's 972-863-1031. And ERG has a Facebook page. My Facebook page for 1031 is 1031 Exchange Assistance. So give me a little feedback here. Was it hard? Was it real hard to understand? Did you get something?
That was great. A couple things. I put that phone number in the chat and your email in the Facebook. There's a connection for your Facebook page in the chat as well. If people want to click on that now. And I did have when someone is possibly considering doing this doing the 1031 exchange for a personal house, their only option is to lease that out for a year and a day, or is there something else they may be able to do for the 1031 exchange?
They probably don't need us if it's their personal residence, because under that section 121, if they're single and they've got under $250,000 worth of gain, they don't have to pay any capital gains tax. If they're married, they don't have to pay any capital gains tax on the first 500,000. But if they've got more gain with that, then yes, we could work with them on that. Or if they have an investment property that they want a 1031 exchange and eventually live in it, then we can work with them on that. Who said in here the drop and swap rules? I agree.
What was meant by that?
Drop and swap lives. Well, so if you were in an LLC, it doesn't work with subchapter S or other kind of partnerships. But if you have an LLC with a couple people and you want to go different directions, what can be done, and say you get K1s out of that LLC, what can be done is that LLC can be dissolved. You can drop the LLC and deed the interest in the properties into the individual member's taxpayer ID and do a 1031 exchange. The only risk there is if you were ever audited you'd have to show the IRS. You're probably not going to do the drop of the LLC and hold it for a year and a day as an individual. So you might have a little bit of an argument with the IRS that the taxpayer ID was the same. But if you show them your K-1s, show that the money came to your own taxpayer ID, it's a calculated risk, let's put it that way. Are there any written materials for this course? Yeah, I can send you, actually have a handout that I can send you. And I'll also send you a brochure. We have a really good brochure, and there's a link to the website, and then I can send you a handout. What else?
Great class, thank you.
It's a lot of information to pack into an hour. So we actually made it in just an hour. I said 45 minutes, but it went a little bit longer. Okay, so send me an email with your license number for the CE credit. Thank you, Charles. Jason.
Well, right now would be Travis. I'll call you right back.
Does anyone have any other comments or questions? Any feedback?
Thanks again. I have to get to my next appointment, so we appreciate it. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
All right, you have a good day. Stay safe and healthy.
For sure.
Hey, I got my first shot at 7:30 this morning, my first vaccine in Fort Worth. Yuck. Okay, well, I guess that's it.
Yeah, thanks, Luann. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan.